This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. First up this week is my conversation with Getty Museum curator Casey Lee discussing Artists as Collectors, an exhibition exploring how artists accumulated, cared for, and used drawings by other artists that they avidly collected, on view at the Getty Center through September 12th. In segment 2, I speak to photographer and painter Marilyn Minter about her examination of female strength and sexuality from the perspective of a female eye. Minter's work is in the collections of the Tate Modern, Guggenheim, MoMA, MoCA, SFMoMA, MFA Boston, and the Whitney, while commercial commissions have brought her imagery into the mainstream. She's the beneficiary of a Louis Comfort Tiffany Grant and a Guggenheim Fellowship, as well as an honorary doctorate from the School of the Visual Arts in New York. At the end of the episode, I'll be wrapping things up with some of the week's top art headlines. But first up, Artists as Collectors. Casey, thank you for joining us today to talk about your exhibit there at the Getty Museum, Artists as Collectors. And so, can you give us kind of an overview of the exhibition?
Sure, Craig, and thanks for having me. So, Artists as Collectors is an exhibition that looks into the collecting practices of artists from the 16th to the 19th century, and it specifically focuses on drawings, which holds a pretty special place within artists' collections. Drawings is an essential part of the creative process. It is a way for artists to work on an idea. It's how they record observations, relay information, and is just something you do for its own sake. Artists kept drawings pretty close at hand, usually in their workshop or studios, and when artists died, their workshops were dispersed, and it is possible to see how teachers would give their favorite pupils drawings as sort of a continuation of their legacy. Drawings were a sort of trade secret. Artists were among the first group of people to collect drawings, initially because of professional motivations. Drawings were a vehicle for knowledge, and as I said, they were pretty carefully guarded. But a market began to develop in the 16th century, and the practice became more widespread and collections became more varied. And so this exhibition highlights some important artist collectors. It looks at how these collections were built, how they were used, and how they were displayed.
So what was the genesis of the project? Was it your idea to put together this exhibit?
Yeah, so it actually comes much further from before my time at the Getty. It actually comes from my dissertation research, which was on Dutch 17th century artists as collectors of prints and drawings. And that project actually began because of my interest in Rembrandt. And Rembrandt was a passionate collector of prints and drawings. And I was just really interested in thinking about what artists owned and how their possessions informed their profession.
So are all of the drawings in the exhibit from the Getty's collection?
Yes, all the drawings on view are from the Getty's permanent collection of drawings.
And how big is that? In my imagination, you guys have a pretty extensive collection of these sorts of drawings.
Our collection is actually pretty small in terms of drawings collections or works on paper collections. We have almost 1,000 sheets, but we're also a pretty young collection. We started in 1981, and our first drawing was a Rembrandt drawing. It's the nude woman with the snake, and it's actually on view in the exhibition. As a museum, what do you guys see as your main responsibility for the collection in terms of being a steward over it? Do you think of yourselves more from a conservation or an education or exhibition, or maybe it's all of the above? What is your main charge as a museum in terms of caring for this collection? I would say it's all of the above, and I think education has a great overlap between conservation and exhibition. The Getty has a really great team of curators, conservators, registrars, art handlers, and we all kind of work together to make sure that the collection is preserved and that we're also able to share it. So for drawings specifically, because they're light-sensitive objects, we share them through rotations, and they're also fairly short runs just because they are light-sensitive. We also have a study room, and under normal circumstances, visitors can come at any time and request to see things that aren't on the walls. We also have all of our collection online, so if you're not able to come and see things in person, you can just go to the website.
So did these artists, did they actually put the work on the walls, or were they more pragmatic? Was it more of a tool of study, something that they would take out of flat files and make reference to and take inspiration from?
It's a little bit of both, but it's mostly the latter. So artists would use these works as a reference material. When you're training young pupils, what they would do is first encourage you to learn how to copy and master other people's styles and techniques. So you would be copying prints, you would be copying drawings, and then as you matured as an artist, you would use these repositories to come back for ideas. But it's also a very social practice. Artists would be part of these social clubs, and they would invite other people over and take out drawings and discuss their formal qualities, their subject matter. I think one of my favorite is Paul Sandby was known to have these really wonderful gatherings, and one of the objects in his collection is two drawings by Vasari, and that's in the exhibition. And you can just imagine a group of artists standing around looking at these works, sipping wine, and talking about it.
Since you are the expert on Rembrandt and his collection of drawings, so what did his collection consist of? What was he looking at? I mean, was he using these drawings in much the same way that you've discussed here? And what was in his collection? Was it Dürer or who?
It was Dürer. It was also a lot of Italian artists, and he was looking not just at drawings but of prints as well. And what's really interesting is what we know a little bit about the contents of his collection, because he went bankrupt in the 1650s, and there's an inventory of his household. And we think he was there just because of the specificity of how some of these objects were described. He talks about having albums dedicated to the best masters of the world. And so he was looking at like Antonio Tempesta, Raphael, Marcantonio Raimondi, and then some Dutch artists as well. Lucas van Leyden in particular was a favorite of his.
So are there drawings from his collection that we actually have provenance going all the way back to that liquidation?
Unfortunately, not at the Getty. What we do have instead is something that's a bit more tangential. Rembrandt had a huge studio, and he had many pupils. Among those pupils is an artist named Robert Flink. And Flink was also known to have a pretty large collection of prints and drawings. And then when he died, that collection passed on to his son, Nicholas Flink. And Nicholas Flink sold all of his prints because he was really more interested in drawings. And we have drawings from that collection instead. So you kind of see this sort of trajectory and influence of Rembrandt through how he inspires subsequent generations, either directly or indirectly.
Well, I was going through the catalog of the exhibit online yesterday, and one piece really caught my eye, and that was a piece by Ingres, Madame Moitessier, and it's a really compelling portrait. And just poked around on the line a little bit, and it looked like it was probably a preparatory sketch for a portrait that's at the National Gallery in D.C. Can you tell me a little bit about that piece?
Yeah, sure. So you're correct. It is a preparatory study for a portrait that's in D.C. Eng actually did two portraits of this woman. The other one's in the National Gallery in London. And so this one was his second attempt at finishing this portrait. And he finished that one and then returned to the other portrait. Sorry, it's a bit complicated.
No, it's okay.
But so when he finished the portrait that's at the National Gallery, he gave some of his drawings to the subject's family, and so this is where Degas comes in. Degas, the Impressionist painter Edgar Degas, was completely enamored with Eng. He was very inspired by his work. Degas had what he called the three great draftsmen, all French artists, and they were Delacroix, Daumier, and Eng. He had actually met Eng a number of times, and Eng became this sort of mythical personage in Degas' life. And Degas made great efforts to collect his work. He actually ended up with something like 20 paintings and several drawings. And Degas actually tracked down the Moitessier family and went to visit them and was able to acquire this drawing.
So that drawing, I was looking at the scale of it. I assume that's probably kind of the final scale of the portrait in the painting. Is that about right? I mean, it seems like it's probably about the size of a person's face. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. It's a to scale drawing of the woman's face, who Eng described as something like a great and terrible beauty.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a put down, but so tell me, in the course of researching this exhibit, is there an artist that you feel like you understand a little bit better as a result of seeing what they collected?
Well, what I really enjoyed about working on this exhibition is that it's a continuous dialogue between the artist, the object, and the artists who created the work and the collectors that came before them. So each one kind of provides new insights. A work that I found really fascinating is our drawing by Parmigianino of the study of two Holy Families. And it's weird. It's kind of one complete drawing and then you flip it and it's another try at the same subject. It kind of looks like a playing card, like a King of Hearts sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was owned by the English artist Jonathan Richardson Sr., and he decided that one orientation was the correct orientation. He mounted this drawing on his signature mount, which has some brown framing lines and a gold border.
Mm-hmm.
And then subsequent collectors were like, yeah, this makes sense to me, and they put their marks in the same orientation. And then Benjamin West comes along, and he's like, I'm not really sure about this, and actually marks it on both sides, allowing for the fact that the artist Parmigianino didn't necessarily think that one orientation was correct. We're going with Jonathan Richardson Sr., but that's like a little detail that I love to do because these drawings weren't necessarily always stuck on a wall. They were something you could pull out, turn around, flip over.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've seen some work before displayed in a way where it's kind of sandwiched between two panes of glass and kind of displayed upright to be able to see what's going on both ways. But that's an interesting dilemma there. So, Casey, how much longer is the exhibit running?
So the exhibit is running through September 12th.
The exhibit's open May 25th, is up until September 12th, and that's at the J. Paul Getty Museum, correct?
Yes, at the center in Brentwood.
Got it. Well, Casey, it's really been a pleasure talking with you today, and I really appreciate your time, and encourage folks to go out and see some masterpieces.
So before I received my Cambia, I had seen a number of videos online of people trying to figure out whether the image on a Cambia was a painting or a digital image. The people were sincere, but kept guessing that Cambia's display was an actual painting. I think it's okay to say I was a little skeptical. I mean, after all, I've seen my share of paintings. But then my Cambia showed up and I started to go through the artwork and I could see what they meant. Not only does the full HD display provide incredible detail, but the device actually samples the light in the room and makes the image look as though it's the real deal. It doesn't look backlit. And because it's sampling the light in the room, the artwork takes on the warmth or coolness of the light. I remember that first night, I pulled up a painting of a Paris street scene that had really thick brushstrokes that us painters refer to as impasto. Paint was so thick you could see little shadows, and those shadows lined up with the lamp next to my Cambia, and it really did look just like a real painting. All this was made possible because of Cambia's commitment to being the leader in display technology. The whole system that samples the lighting conditions in your space to heighten your viewing experience is a patented technology called ArtSense. And you may remember me talking about leaving the same image up on my Cambia for days. Well, I can do that because Cambia has a patent on technology that uses something called stochastic modeling to prevent image burn. This way, I can look at Gustav Klimt's Judith with the Head of Holofernes as long as I want. I love my Cambia, and I think you will too. So if you want to learn more about Cambia, head over to cambia.art and check it out. Now, a conversation with Marilyn Minter about feminism, sexuality, and her love of enamel.
Marilyn Minter, It's a real pleasure to have you on the broadcast. I've been following and admiring your work for years, and thank you for being willing to sit down and have a discussion about your body of work and your career.
Oh, thank you.
So, I like to sometimes have artists kind of start with this. Say you're at a dinner party, or if you're run into somebody at the grocery store and they say, "What do you do?" and you say, "An artist." How do you describe your work to someone who's never seen your work before?
I don't. I don't. I basically say, it's pretty hard to describe. I think probably the best, if you want to know what I do, just look it up, and then it's easier if you see a picture of it, because I could explain to you. It's really a visual. Yeah, that's what I say to strangers. It's really a visual thing. It's not a verbal description.
Right.
And it's a lot easier. I could talk to you about what I do if you just take a picture. Look on Google, basically.
Sure.
That sounds so pretentious. Google me. But I try and say that in a polite way.
Sure. Well, we're all on Instagram. Where it's a visual medium.
Who doesn't have access to visual imagery?
Right.
It's too hard to describe verbally. It's impossible, actually.
Yeah, and you know what? I guess in a way it is an unfair question, because I've asked artists this, and some of them will say, "Well, that's the reason I paint, because I can't put it in words. That's the reason I make the visual image."
Yeah.
Right?
I feel that way too. I really hate having to talk. Asking people, what are you thinking here? The whole idea is for you to come up with what are you thinking here? What is this strike? My whole raison d'etre is to have a viewer see what I'm doing and say, "Oh, I know that. I know it's a truth." And maybe I've never seen it before, but I know that's something that exists.
Tell me, your work, as everyone's work, it's evolved over time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you first got to New York, you were making work that was totally different, right?
Yes, totally. Yes. I was right out of school, and I thought of myself as a conceptual photorealist. And then I went around to different galleries, and they said, "Oh, yeah, you're a photorealist, but a really boring one."
Well, that's the risk of conceptualism, right?
Yeah, and I thought I was really funny or amusing. I was painting black and white photographs on the floor, or and they just like, "Oh, who cares?" It was like photorealism at that point in time was actually shiny and very flashy,
Mm-hmm.
marbles and pinball machines, and it was really, it was this kind of, it was the popular form of it was that if you looked at a photorealist painting, it looked just like a photo, and that was the remarkable part.
Right.
It looked just like a photo, and what I did was I took photos. I actually took Polaroids even, and painted them on a table or on a floor, or black and white photos I just made them a little bigger, because at that time color photography was not as prevalent. This was in 70s. Mm-hmm. Really right around the time Eggleston had his big color show at MoMA.
Right.
So black and white was what you learned. You didn't even learn color in school.
Right. Was there a particular turning point? When I think of your work today, I really think of the female form. I wouldn't say hypersexual, but sexuality and the female form are two words that are in feminism, or all three terms that are usually go along with Marilyn Minter. Is there a particular point?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I really did think in terms of women, the images women would actually decide to work with, and when you started to actually study women painters, the first one I ever studied was Mary Cassatt, who
Mm-hmm.
worked with mothers as a mother and children, together. And my whole gig really is about female agency. What do we own? What do we get to own? I just did that show in Montpellier about women bathers. And it was, what does it look like to, the bather in all of art history has always been a sort of softcore porn, which I don't know, no problem with softcore porn, but it was just this kind of voyeuristic moment of, Apollo discovering Daphne in the stream,
right,
up into, Degas women bathing in tubs, or Bonnard, women in always in a bathtub. And I thought, there's so many images of women grooming. What does it look like when a female artist makes pictures of women grooming, women bathing, women combing their hair, women playing with their hair in a shower? And then I worked with unconventional looking women, not these skinny white girls all necessarily, big breasted dark women. And, for instance, I'm working on this whole series of Olympias with unconventional bodies, big women instead of, what we think of as Olympia, which was a shocking painting at the time because she was a bold woman who just said, she was basically a prostitute who wasn't at all ashamed of her nakedness.
Right.
And there was this whole voyeuristic or peeping Tom aspect of the women bathing that doing the opposite of.
Sure.
If that makes any sense.
No,
yeah.
it does. And it's interesting, this whole conversation, our episode of the podcast last week, I was speaking with Jennifer Higgy, who...
Oh, yeah, I love her.
Right. And
she wrote the essay from my catalog.
Oh, wow, I didn't even know that. This is the conversation we were having with Jennifer Higgy. She just wrote the book Mirror and Palette, about 500 years of women.
I know. I have to read that. Yeah.
And so, it's very much exactly the same thing. The art world has always kind of force-fed us the images of the female form.
Male artists.
And so what does it look like when a woman takes on that, that composition?
The male gaze. Was there a female
Right.
gaze? We're all used to the male gaze. And we're all used to the male gaze in sexuality. And so my whole race that, like I said, is what does it look like when women are not the subject but the agents? We are in the form of production for our own amusement and our own pleasure.
Right. So let me ask you this. In your work, is the sexuality, has it ever intended to shock, or is it merely providing that agency?
No, I never. It stuns me that anyone thinks I was trying to be shocking. I think in the 90s and the 80s, when I first started working with sexual imagery, no one ever saw women working with it. It was like the feminist, which I thought of myself as one. It was verboten. Sexuality was verboten in those days. Like, there was all this women against pornography, and there was a kind of political correctness in the air. And I just thought I was a pro-sex feminist, which everyone I knew was. And I think when I wanted to see does it change the meaning if a woman is the producer of sexual imagery? Does that change the meaning? And I asked these questions, and I didn't have answers, and I didn't have answers condemning sexuality, which was the prevailing feminist thinking. It was I was a very small minority, not knowing that. And the fact that I was just asking the questions, I think I was taking an abusive history and reclaiming it. And that was a new vision about women. Women just didn't do things like that. And it's still sort of like that today. I was young enough that I was still in that category of a young girl working with sexuality. I think once you're postmenopausal, you can do anything. No one gives a shit, I always think about that picture of Robert Mapplethorpe took of Louise Bourgeois with that giant dildo and how adorable she looks. Everyone thinks she's so cute. Because if you're young and working with sexuality, it's threatening. It's so threatening to the status quo, which I think is fascinating. And I'd love to see more people exploring that. Why is that? Why is it so scary to have a young woman work with sexual imagery?
So let me ask you about your models. it seems like some of the models you've worked with recently that are of the more celebrity ilk kind of embody some of that. When you think of like Lady Gaga or Lizzo, do you reach out to these people, or is it just kind of an organic thing where you meet and you figure out that?
Well, I get asked to do portraits of people for different various publications, and most of the time I'm not interested, but I'm totally interested in Gaga. She's changed, music, and Lizzo too, and they both really own sexuality. And so I say yes when I'm asked to do those people. So Gaga was just, the New York Times wanted me to do a cover story on her on the magazine, New York Times Magazine, and that just evolved. And then I'm making a painting of her right now, and I'm doing Lizzo too. I didn't even know you knew about that.
I have my sources, right?
Oh yeah, I'm making Lizzo my Olympia.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's awesome.
But I haven't shot her yet because of the coronavirus. I was supposed to shoot her last March, but I couldn't even fly until a couple of months ago. Weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, man. But you were able to make it to Paris.
I made it to Nice.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, actually Paris to Montpellier. But it was, I had a COVID test right before, and the same getting COVID test at Versailles to come back to the United States. You still can't come to the United States from Europe unless you're an American citizen. And I don't, now I can fly to LA, but I'm hoping I could shoot Lizzo here because all my equipment's here, everything I need to do. So I'm sort of waiting for her to come here.
That's wonderful.
Although if I have to, I could set it up in LA.
Sure.
It's a big shoot,
So I know, in my mind, it was probably about a decade ago, you did a number of paintings where the collector Amy Phelan actually was...
Amy was my model, yeah.
I feel like, almost like she was your muse there for a while.
It's really true. I could not find somebody with lips like hers. They were, she had these great lips. She has these great lips. And I was a total unknown. This was, I guess, I didn't have any... I could say I'd like to shoot somebody, and they'd say, "Who are you?" I don't know you from Adam. And so they would just say no. And if I if I saw somebody who had a mouth that I was looking for, and my art dealer in Colorado, Harley Baldwin, said, "I have the perfect model for you," because he knew I was looking for somebody with her mouth, with that kind of mouth. And I just made a whole bunch of photos and paintings from using Amy. She was a real good sport.
And so that was during a period where you were really zooming in on, particular ares.
I still do.
Right.
I zoom, yeah. It's really hard for me to go as far. I think I'm doing a few whole bodies for the first time right now, but even they're a little bit cut off, the top of the head or one of the legs. But I really love close-ups. It's like how my vision is really. But to create the Olympia, I have to get pretty much a lot of the body in there in the frame. It's hard for me actually.
Right. When you were doing those zoomed in pieces, is that when you first started getting into utilizing Photoshop?
Well, as soon as I started using Photoshop as soon as it was available to me. I can draw, so it's easy for me to change things just by drawing it. But once I learned Photoshop, it was like 1,000 times easier. And so then I started combining things, like I did paintings of fingers and toes, combined. Or if I wanted a neck really long, I just extended it in Photoshop from my photos. So it was just a way to... it's a tool. It's basically a tool, and I've been using it ever since. And now I'm really extreme with it at this point. We're really good at it. And, I learned it really well when it first came out, but at this point, I have people that are so much better than me. They wipe the floor with me. I let them do it now, and I just tell them what I want.
That's a question I've always wanted to ask you, is exactly what that relationship is like working with your team. How does that process, I'm sure you're there conceptually and you hand things off, you get them back, you add on top of them.
It's really a real collaborative process. It's really, I've been working with the same people for years, and it's just certain kinds of people. Only certain kinds of people can do this kind of painting. I invented this technique, and it's translucent layers of enamel paint, and there's an underpainting that takes a long time to lay down, and I don't do that part anymore. I just do the finishing. Mm-hmm. And but I have the same six people I've worked with for some of them 15 years, one of them over 20 years. So I see their skill set. So sometimes there'll be somebody who's really good with something sparkly. They go in that one area. I'll put them in that area, that kind of thing. But we all work on everything. Everybody works. And the paintings are layers and layers. They take a year to do.
Oh, gosh.
But you can't tell in reproduction. Mm-hmm. You have to really see them in person.
I mean, that was going to be my next question. Was my understanding is that enamel, it sounds like no one else dares work with this material that you've chosen, but it sounds like the end product is almost like a candy-like surface,
it's
fresh nails.
It's richer than oil or acrylic. And I work with CMKY color a lot, not just primaries.
Oh, wow.
So we work with digital color a lot. I use this proper purple in all kinds of things. And it's just kind of a richness and a texture and a deepness that I can get because it's translucent. Like if I have a really dark color underneath, it comes through on the, we actually sit here and think of ourselves as, sounds crazy though, but like really thin sculptures. This is a really deep, dark purple at the very back of the, let's say a mouse painting. Mm. And then there's like the steam on top where you're breathing into this piece of glass. So it comes from this way, way deep color all the way to these really light colors of beads of water from breathing on a piece of glass. So it's you have to actually have the kind of patience, or you have this kind of therapeutic repetition that's very satisfying that only certain people can do. It's not about gestural things at all. It's building. It sounds crazy, but we think of ourselves as little sculptors.
Oh, sure.
Very thin sculptures.
Oh, no, but there is still a long history of artists who built up layers of glazing.
Exactly.
To get
it's like a 21st century form of glazing, and no one can. It's enamel, so no one really copies it.
Right.
It's like I sort of invented it with this enamel. It's really hard to copy. It would take. I haven't seen anyone like making enamel paintings like mine. Usually when anyone works in enamel, they work with one hard layer next to another, like,
right.
Or Joyce Pensada, she's the other one, but or Chris Wool, not that many. Gary Hume, not too many of us work in enamel.
How do you choose which pieces are purely photographs versus which ones get converted into paintings?
The ones that are photographs are really simple. I don't have to do anything to them. Crop them. That's the most I'll do.
Right. So they're too perfect to need to be painted.
I wouldn't. Yeah, never paint it. Yeah, why bother? And they're like drawings for a traditional artist, my photos. Like with the paintings, sometimes there's 80 layers of Photoshop.
Right. Oh gosh.
Yeah, it's never just one. It's never like I'm doing these portraits now, and I take or the bathers. I took nipples from other shoots. That's how much these are Frankenstein people.
Right. So
it's really sandwiches of negatives.
So your current exhibit is at the Montpellier Contemporain, and that is the bather pieces. Is how many pieces are installed there? Is it
about 15?
Okay.
And I've been working on these bathers for years. Yeah,
Oh,
and then
gosh.
the other half of it is Betty Tompkins, and hers are all the fuck paintings, and we really look great together. Hers are all black and white, mine are all in color, and we took over the whole museum. And I don't really think in this country they could do this show. In the south of France, nobody bats an eye, but they'll give Betty a show and they'll give me a show, but they would never combine us, I think, in this country. Not yet, anyway. Maybe someday.
Right. So, Marilyn, if folks wanted to keep track of you and what's on the horizon, you have that show. Are there any other shows coming up here domestic in the U.S. that folks should keep an eye on?
I'm in group shows, and then I have a one-person show at Salon 94, my New York gallery, and that is in 22. And in 22, I'm doing a solo show in L.A., too, at Reagan Projects, and also one in Seoul at Lehman Mopin.
Wow. It sounds
But
like you're
that's
going to be busy.
22, yeah.
And if folks wanted to keep track of you, I think your website is...
Yeah, MarilynMinter.net, sorry. Do I have any shows coming up? Because we worked so hard to do this one. I haven't even thought what we're... Yeah.
Right.
No, we're just working towards my solo. Yeah. Pardon? Yeah, Salon, and that's a big one. Yeah, the space is 3 floors. But, yeah, I have the whole space.
And so the plan is to be able to see Olympia Lizzo at that show.
Well, I don't know. At this point, maybe not. We'll see another Olympia, though. We'll see Olympia Jasmine, actually. Hopefully, if I could shoot her by August, because if I don't shoot her by August, then I'm not going to be able to finish it. But it'll be in my next show. It'll be in the LA show.
Sure. Well, Marilyn, I really treasure this time that I've had to talk with you today. I think our listeners will really be intrigued and entertained by our conversation. And
thank you, Craig.
Yeah, I really appreciate you joining me.
Okay, thank you so much, and
All right.
good luck.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
You have a great day.
And now, the news. Damien Hirst, who along with Jeff Koons has served as the poster boys for art world excess, greed, and capitalism, is back in the news this week. Hirst is in the process of launching a project called The Currency, which is comprised of 10,000 pieces of art which share the same characteristics as a fiat currency. For $2,000, one can purchase one of 10,000 NFTs. Each NFT consists of a photograph of a physical piece of art of colored dots painted on a piece of paper. Each of those pieces is individually numbered, signed, and stamped by the artist with a microdot and a hologram of Hirst's likeness. Each piece has a title created randomly using artificial intelligence. The buyer purchases the NFT, but has 1 year to exchange the NFT for the physical piece of art. At the end of that year, any unclaimed physical pieces will be burned. Hirst is blurring the lines between art and currency, which is the logical next step for the artist who for years has been mass-producing art in large-scale factories to capitalize on his brand. Hirst has shocked audiences for years with bisected animals floating in vats of formaldehyde, the creation and sale of relics from a fake shipwreck, and of course the $100 million sale of a diamond-encrusted platinum skull titled For the Love of God. That sale made quite a splash in 2007 when Hirst announced that he had sold the piece for £50 million to a consortium in a direct cash sale, which, left no paper trail. It was eventually learned that Hirst himself was part of the consortium that bought the artwork. This is not exactly unusual in the art world. Sometimes there are straw buyers. that represent the artist or dealer who will buy artworks at auction at a given price if it looks like the artwork's going to sell to someone for a price that will negatively affect the value of other pieces. It's all about maintaining your value. In a 2012 Time magazine article, Hearst got around to explaining that what he really sold in 2007 was a 33% stake in the piece to an anonymous investor group so he could cover the fabrication and marketing costs. So that $50 million payday wasn't actually a $50 million payday. It was more just breaking even. In the case of the currency, Hearst will stand to make $20 million right off the bat, and even more if he decides to keep a number of the pieces for himself and allow the work to appreciate. In a related story, the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia is planning to mint and sell NFTs of some of its most famous artworks, making it the first museum of its size and reputation to monetize on its collection through the sale of NFTs. The museum will sell digital copies of Madonna Lita by Leonardo da Vinci, Judith by Giorgione, Lilac Bush by Vincent van Gogh, Composition 6 by Vasily Kandinsky, and Corner of the Garden of Montgeron by Claude Monet. CoinDesk reports that each NFT will be issued in 2 copies, one held by the Hermitage itself and the other going to the buyer. The metadata of the NFTs will include Hermitage director Mikhail Piotrowski's signature, the time of the signing, and the certification that it was signed in the Hermitage. The auction will take place in August on the Binance NFT marketplace. This sale of digital editions of artworks and collections is an interesting alternative to the debate around deaccessioning, which has landed some institutions like the Baltimore Museum of Art in the middle of a PR nightmare. And that might be the reason we're hearing about a feel-good story this week from the Baltimore Museum of Art. It was recently announced that there will be an exhibit opening next March at the museum titled Guarding the Art, which will be curated by 17 members of the museum's security staff. The hope is that the exhibit is able to draw on more diverse perspectives. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to Art Sense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, and while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. If you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read a transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.